Hi, I'm not a French citizen, nor do I have any immediate French heritage, nor have I ever set foot in France in my whole life up to this point, but screw it. For Hartnell Month, I want to discuss the first Doctor's visit to that country. Je m'appelle de Lepin. The First Doctor era seems to have a pretty loose but still tangible interest in French history. I mean, Hartnell's tenure had 13 serials that visited the past in some fashion, 10 of those being pure historicals, and a whole 2 of those pure historicals were set within the borders of l'Hexagone. Think about that. Of any and all famous past events to choose from of any nation across the globe, the creative minds behind the First Doctor era opted to explore the history of France in particular not once, but twice. We could have had that Leif Erikson Viking story, or that Alexander the Great narrative in place of one of these.
Click the link.
But no, we ended up getting a double dosage of the Land of Wine, world-famous towers that women bonk, and Pixar rats. Well, having noticed this admittedly pretty tenuous pattern, I'm now going to take you through these occasions. Whether intentionally or not, Doctor Who's first visit to France is actually foreshadowed in the debut episode of the entire show, Susan borrowing Barbara's book on the French Revolution. Neat detail there in retrospect. Anyway, at the tail end of the season, the TARDIS arrives back on Earth during an attempt by the Doctor to get Ian and Barbara to their home time. Upon finding out their location from a young boy and discerning the time period from furniture and documents located in a nearby abandoned house, the time travellers conclude that they have ended up during the French Revolution, for this very aptly named story, The Reign of Terror, written by Dennis Spooner. Ian, Barbara and Susan are soon captured by revolutionary soldiers and are taken to the Concierge prison in Paris, and are sentenced to execution by guillotine. The Doctor follows in pursuit and tries using a regional officer disguise and careful negotiation to infiltrate the prison and free his friends. Thing is, they've all been busy in the meantime and escaped in their own different ways, and so now the Doctor's priority is laying low, manipulating the revolutionary officials and playing the waiting game before he can reunite with his fugitive companions, who themselves are having to fight tooth and nail to avoid betrayal and capture by spies, and literally keep their heads on straight. So, I've always been a big fan of this serial, despite its faults. Then again, I tend to swallow these grandiose First Doctor era split-up scenarios hook, line and sinker pretty much every time they're done. But as a depiction of France and French history, how does it hold up? Well, for starters, let's acknowledge the blatantly obvious elephant in the room. All the French characters are performed with English accents.
Issued by the governing committee.
Oh, don't be fools, citizens! They're traitors!
Probably for the best, in all fairness. I mean, considering how painful the attempts at American accents are in certain other 60s Who stories, yeah, maybe it's for the best that they just sidestepped attempting French entirely, save for a handful of the more obvious phrases.
Au revoir, Monsieur Kaki.
But that does segue into a larger issue, as a big point of criticism levelled against the Reign of Terror over the years has been for its eyebrow-raising historical inaccuracies. I mean, tonally it seems pretty on point, I dare say. For a time period that's infamous for total political upheaval and innocent people literally being rounded up to get their heads cut off, it's a very bleak, dour and oppressive feeling serial, especially in scenes when our protagonists are in immediate danger or are in hiding. Brr, sorry, I got a shudder.
It's probably just a chill.
And the aesthetics are great too. The costumes, the sets and lighting are absolutely gorgeous and astonishingly engrossing. But in terms of translating the real history of the Reign of Terror into a Doctor Who narrative, yeah, it's a bit dodgy and shockingly inaccurate. Especially for a time when one of Doctor Who's major mission statements was to be educational, particularly in historical matters. Now, I know some smartass might think, wow, turns out a narrative involving time travellers getting embroiled in historical events isn't actually accurate to the history that truly happened. Big shocker! But shut up, no, that's not what I mean. Even some events that our fish out of water characters have no influence on are just incorrect. The depiction of Maximilien Robespierre's downfall is especially egregious, with Napoleon Bonaparte's 1799 coup being fanficked into occurring 5 years earlier to help bring it about. By all accounts, Napoleon wasn't involved with the politics of Robespierre's Reign of Terror specifically, and reportedly didn't have any bad blood with Robespierre himself, so this is a very abbreviated and twisted depiction of how this period of French history actually went down. I'm feeling just like Susan in An Unearthly Child.
That's not right.
Then again, the French Revolution is such a convoluted part of history that you'd probably have to turn it into a full-on HBO series to truly do it justice. The Doctor himself would definitely tune into that. I mean, according to Susan, it's his favourite period of Earth's history.
We might not get back to the ship if Grandfather hears we're in the Reign of Terror. It's his favourite period in the history of Earth.
I applaud any individual who can comprehend all of that, so good on him. Anyway, the First Doctor's other major escapade into French history comes partway through the show's 3rd season, where he and Stephen arrive in 16th century France. After soaking in some local atmosphere, the Doctor decides to pay a visit to Charles Preslin, an apothecary he admires, while Stephen befriends a group of Huguenots and a scared servant girl called Anne Chaplet. As Stephen waits for the Doctor's increasingly delayed return, he explores the religious tension between the Huguenots and the ruling Catholics, and events become even more complicated for him when the Catholic abbot of Amboise strikingly resembles the Doctor. But worst of all, the religious tension is close to bubbling over, and many people are about to die. For this appropriately titled story, The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, The Massacre for short, by John Lucarotti. So as for this serial's representation of France and its past, well, Massacre de la Saint Barthélemy is certainly a much more niche part of French history than the Reign of Terror, so kudos to Lucarotti for going a bit deeper down the historical event iceberg. Otherwise, like the Reign of Terror, we've got another case of French characters being portrayed with English accents.
It's time for the curfew. Where will you stay if he doesn't come?
I don't know, but I'm sure he will come.
It's the curfew now. You must come with me. You can always come back here in the morning.
Landlord, yes, sir. This is very kind of you, but I'm sure he will come.
Not now. He must be delayed somewhere. Then come.
Which, you know, expected. And also, like the Reign of Terror, there's more blatant historical inaccuracies. Well, okay, not really. Merely the serial's overall unabbreviated title is incorrect. The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. The actual historical massacre truly began and occurred on St. Bartholomew's Day itself. And in all fairness, they do get that right in the actual narrative of the story. I guess it's just named after the eve purely because the adventure focuses more on the build-up, which, alright, I'll let that slide. Otherwise, it's a much harder story to truly grade the accuracy of because, well, as I said, the event they're depicting is much more obscure, and also because very little actually survives of this serial. Not a single second of footage as a matter of fact, so it's harder to ascertain if it visually captures the setting well. Granted, Granted, there are a few surviving photographs, and the costumes on display in them do look absolutely gorgeous, but narratively speaking, it captures a very harsh and confrontational atmosphere that feels apt for this bloody chapter in the French Wars of Religion. The politics of the event also seem to be much more faithfully represented this time around, with the failed assassination attempt on the Huguenot Admiral de Coligny spurring the Catholic Queen Mother on to pressure her son King Charles into agreeing to the massacre. Juicy political intrigue, even if it is somewhat harder to absorb when you don't have the originally intended visual presentation. Outside of these two stories, the First Doctor era does have a few other loose or tangentially related references to France that I might as well cover here. I mean, I mentioned the French Revolution book after all. In The Time Meddler, the meddling monk ultimately wants King Harold and the Anglo-Saxons to win out against the French Norman army at Hastings by nuking the Viking fleet in Northumbria. Alright. Of course, with companion Dodo Chaplet seemingly being a descendant of the previously mentioned Anne Chaplet, she therefore has some distant French heritage that never comes up again. Pharaoh, from Planet of Giants, was going to cross the rivers of France all by himself before Forrester gunned him down. Richard the Lionheart mentions King Philip II of France among his enemies in the Crusade.
And trades with my enemy, Philip of France.
Trade!
Vicky states that French hasn't been invented yet in the Romans, and in the bogeyman of First Doctor stories Twice Upon a Time, the First Doctor has these choice words to say about a future self's TARDIS decor.
This is the flight deck of the most powerful space-time machine in the known universe, not a restaurant for the French.
Okay, there's a couple of expanded media entries involving the First Doctor visiting France as well, namely the Rainmakers, Fields of Terror, and the Little Drummer Boy, but I wanted to focus purely on TV for simplicity's sake. Anyway, that's the First Doctor's visits to France, with a little extra. Do I have an overall point to make about how the show's early days treated France, its history, and its culture? Nah, not really. I just thought it'd make a fun topic for Hartnell Month. With that said, au revoir! Also, thanks Dylan for helping me with research. You are a bestie boo-boo, Lord Slug.